The sun dipped below the jagged skyline of New York City, casting a warm, golden hue over the bustling streets. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, honking cars, hurried footsteps, and the distant hum of conversations. Inside La Belle, an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of Manhattan, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a soft glow over the elegantly set tables. The air was filled with the gentle clinking of fine china, the murmur of sophisticated conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter. It was a place where the city's elite came to see and be seen, a world of opulence and refinement. Amidst the elegance, a man in a waiter's uniform moved with quiet efficiency. His name was Robert Sinclair, though no one in the restaurant knew that. To the patrons, he was just another server, blending seamlessly into the background. But Robert was far from ordinary. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry who had built an empire from the ground up. His name was synonymous with power, influence, and success. Yet tonight, he wasn't here as Robert Sinclair, the businessman. Tonight, he was here as Robert Sinclair, the father. Robert's daughter, Amelia, was his world. She was everything he had ever hoped for in a child, kind, intelligent, and full of life. She had a way of lighting up a room with her smile, a smile that reminded him so much of her mother. But lately, that smile had been directed at someone else, a young man named Jason. Amelia had been dating Jason for several months, and while she seemed happier than ever, Robert couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at him. Jason wasn't part of their world. He came from a modest background, lived in a small apartment, and worked a regular job. Amelia insisted that this was what made Jason special. "He doesn't care about money, Dad," she had told him one evening, her eyes shining with admiration. "He loves me for me." But Robert wasn't convinced. He had seen too much of the world to take things at face value. Was Jason truly genuine, or was he after the Sinclair fortune? Robert couldn't take that risk. He needed to know the truth, and so he had devised a plan, one that involved going undercover as a waiter at La Belle, the very restaurant where Amelia and Jason were having dinner that night. As the evening unfolded, Robert kept a close eye on the couple. Amelia looked radiant in a simple yet elegant dress, her laughter filling the air. Jason, dressed in a clean blazer, sat across from her, his attention fully focused on her. He seemed polite, attentive, and genuinely interested in what she had to say. Robert approached their table, his head slightly bowed, and offered them a bottle of wine. "Good evening," he said smoothly. Amelia barely glanced at him, too engrossed in her conversation, but Jason looked up and smiled. "No, thank you," he replied politely. Robert retreated, his suspicions momentarily eased. Jason seemed like a decent guy, but Robert wasn't ready to let his guard down just yet. Then, something unexpected happened. A tall man in a black jacket approached Jason, leaning down to whisper something in his ear. Jason's smile vanished, replaced by a look of tension. Amelia noticed the change immediately. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Jason forced a smile. "Yeah, just someone I used to know," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. He excused himself and followed the man outside. Robert's heart raced. He set down his tray and slipped out the kitchen door, trailing them into the dimly lit alley behind the restaurant. Under the flickering glow of a streetlight, Jason faced the man, his voice low but firm. "I told you, I'm done with all of this," he said. The man smirked, his expression cold and calculating. "You think it's that easy? You still owe us. Pay up, or your little girlfriend might find out who you really are." Jason's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. "Leave her out of this," he growled. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the empty alley. "You better think about what I said," he warned before disappearing into the shadows. Robert, hidden behind a stack of crates, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Jason was in trouble, deep trouble, and Amelia was unknowingly caught in the crossfire. Robert's mind raced as he processed what he had just witnessed. Who was this man? What did Jason owe him? And why hadn't Jason told Amelia about any of this? Robert knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen. His mission wasn't over, it had only just begun. The next morning, Robert returned to La Belle, his mind still reeling from the events of the previous night. He found Jason sitting alone at a corner table, staring into his coffee like a man carrying the weight of the world. Robert approached him, a fresh pot of coffee in hand. "Rough night?" he asked casually, pouring Jason a cup. Jason looked up, startled, then sighed. "You could say that," he replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Robert sat across from him, his tone gentle but probing. "Sometimes, talking helps," he said. Jason hesitated, his fingers tapping the side of his mug. Finally, he spoke, his words spilling out in a rush. He confessed to owing money to loan sharks, a debt he had taken on to care for his younger siblings after their parents' death. "I've been working non-stop to pay them back," Jason said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But the interest keeps piling up. I don't know how to get out of this." Robert listened intently, his initial suspicion giving way to empathy. He could see the weight of Jason's struggles in the lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes. "Why haven't you told Amelia?" Robert asked. Jason's jaw tightened, and he looked down at his hands. "Because she deserves better than this," he said quietly. "Better than me." Robert leaned forward, his voice steady. "Jason, there's something you need to know. I'm not just a waiter. I'm Robert Sinclair, Amelia's father." Jason froze, his face pale. "This was a test?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert nodded. "But now I understand what you're dealing with. And I'm willing to help, if you'll let me." Later that day, Robert and Jason confronted the loan sharks in a dingy warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as they stepped inside, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, smirked as they approached. Well, he drawled. "Look who finally showed up." His eyes flicked to Robert, and his smirk faltered slightly. "And who's this? Your lawyer?" "Not quite," Robert replied smoothly, stepping forward. "My name is Robert Sinclair. Perhaps you've heard of me." The man's confidence wavered, replaced by a flicker of recognition. "Sinclair," he muttered, his tone shifting. "The billionaire." "That's right," Robert said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to settle this debt." The man hesitated, then named a figure, $150,000, including interest. Without flinching, Robert pulled out his checkbook and wrote out the amount. He handed the check to the man, his gaze cold and unyielding. "This means you leave Jason and my family alone, permanently," he said. "If I hear otherwise, I'll make sure you regret it." The room fell silent, the weight of Robert's words hanging in the air. The man nodded grudgingly, his bravado crumbling under Robert's authority. As they walked back to the car, Jason let out a shaky breath. "I can't believe you just did that," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Robert glanced at him. "You wanted to protect Amelia," he said. "So do I. This was the only way." That evening, Jason came clean to Amelia, his voice trembling as he revealed the truth. Tears welled in her eyes, but she reached for his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We're a team, Jason," she said softly. "No more secrets, okay?" Jason nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe again. In the weeks that followed, Robert offered Jason a mentorship opportunity at Sinclair Enterprises, not as charity, but as a chance to rebuild his life. Jason embraced it with determination, proving himself worthy of Robert's trust. As for Amelia, she watched the two men in her life grow closer, her heart full. She had always known her father was a force to be reckoned with, but seeing him extend his support to Jason filled her with a deep sense of pride and gratitude. Months later, the three of them sat together at La Belle, sharing a meal as a family. The restaurant was as elegant as ever, but the atmosphere was different, warmer, more intimate. Jason raised his glass, his eyes shining. "To family," he said. Robert smiled, a rare warmth in his gaze. "To family," he echoed.